Let me put it this way. When it comes to the online social justice con game, nothing ever changes. The days, weeks, and seasons of the year change, but the vindictive, fun-killing, self-righteous, circle-jerking, hug-box horseshit remains the same. What will happen this year is what happened last year. The unfortunate fucking repackaged as sexual scandals, the trials by ordeal and moral panics, the rigid choreography from the outrage and indignation playbook, and jargon so incoherent it's actually an alternative language devised by people who learn to communicate by talking to themselves, and the dark triad of neurosis, narcissism, and negativity will be elevated to the level of revealed truth. The targets of a social justice warrior indignant pile-on may change, but the underlying rank hypocrisy in this smokescreen of altruism masking naked self-obsession, and their inner child fighting tooth and nail to escape adulthood, and so lashing out against others, if not the universe itself, for not acquiescing to their petty, weak-ass, white middle-class, frustrated preschooler tantrums, all that is timeless. It gives me a creepy feeling of deja vu, where you've not only seen it before, but ran the well-trodden maze of social justice butthurt, played out in ever-decreasing spiral loops of psychodrama that always lead to the same cul-de-sac up their own assholes, where it's dark and warm, and they don't have to go too far to sniff their own farts. This winter, I was in no mood for that same old shit. You see, aside from dropping into a winter funk when the days grow short and the nights long, I got to suffer through a damp and nasty Washington, D.C. winter. Now, under normal circumstances, a few random snowflakes are enough to propel citizens into total crisis mode, where they empty the store shelves of bottled water and toilet paper, because the biggest threat of Snowmageddon is tap water and itchy ass, and they figured they better buy everything up before the hoarders get to it. Sometimes there's talk of cannibalism, but being the Metro DC area filled with trust fund douchebags and trendy hipster fucks, the talk is all about pretentious Asian fusion cannibalism. Now, as a commuter cyclist, hardy and dedicated enough to ride in abysmal weather, this year's cold and wet gave me the worst case of sinusitis since the Great Ethmoid Extinction event of 2008, the CT scans of which you're looking at right now. Fap away, you sick fucks. The upshot of which is that for the last month or so, I had the kind of sinuses gone to shit postnasal drip that made me feel like I was choking on a bad clam. Well, that's a bad clam. So bad, you'd think it couldn't get any worse. But you'd be wrong.
W, which is Catholic Healthcare West. And that's the...
I figured no one would want to listen to a video by someone who sounded like he was reciting the vagina monologues as performed by an actual vagina. Fortunately, after going through a course of first-tier antibiotics and buying enough Sudafed that I'm probably on the DEA's no-knock raid list, my trial-and-error doctor finally put me on enough weapons-grade Claritin and an antibiotic so strong and broad-spectrum that it killed everything, including the yogurt in my fridge. And so I missed the January window of opportunity to do a Micromedia year-in-review video, as well as the heartwarming Christmas special prior to that. But as I said, there's no chance involved in predicting this year's parade of paint-by-numbers scandals, massive social justice hamstering, and the Groundhog Day sameness of the social justice social media blood sport. Now, as you may have realized, my life operates like a well-oiled machine, and once I go off schedule, it takes me time to get back to where I was. Finally, I was able to get back to my all-weather cycling with my usual determination and flawless skill.
I meant to do that!
I could look forward to another summer of manly outings.
Gotta put on my contour helmet cam because I need wank footage of Chuck walking around in his undies.
And I could start selling some of my old gear on eBay to finance the acquisition of new gear. And some of that new gear will include figuring out which custom gun leather defines me as a complete shitlord. Anyway, the fuchsia-haired crusaders have it a lot easier when it comes to keeping to their schedule of sedentary, low-impact, typing-based activism, where they can focus their 12-watt energy spewing out thoughtless, rote bullshit, as they tend to be chronically underemployed and settled into the comfortable lifestyle niche of a bunch of fat and sassy know-it-all otherkin overlords swapping cat pictures, tales of oppression, and the sexy-ass tattoo they had installed under their fupas. Now, I followed along as best I could. Of course, being productive and gainfully employed puts me at a disadvantage compared to housebound SJWs e-begging for next week's supply of dietary staple junk food and whining about oppressions, misogynies, and their conditions. Still, they do find the time to take on the big issues like manspreading, which is a terrifying form of passive sexual assault. No, really, that's what they claim, the poor dears. But as is the case with sexual harassment, it isn't applicable if women find you hot enough to take the sort of surreptitious photograph that, if done by a guy, would get him labeled a creeper, pepper sprayed, and banned from living within 1,000 feet of a school. Now, back when I was creamed by a car the second time and had to ride the metro with a cane and a broken foot, I learned that women with 2 or 3 bags, and why they need more than one is beyond me, would think of nothing of making me stand while one or more of their bags got the seat next to them. I suspect that manspreading really annoys women only because it takes up space they feel rightfully belongs to their luggage. So, I was not particularly eager to dive back into this sucking black hole of social justice narcissism. Not a bit. Still, while following along, I got the same schadenfreude as anyone else from comic interludes such as Brianna Wu following the breadcrumb trail of Rebecca Watson and Anita Sarkeesian by trying to whip up some negative comments so as to demonstrate how oppressed and therefore right she is. Unfortunately, basic competency doesn't count for much in SJW machinations. When Brianna tried to troll herself, she forgot to switch to an appropriately misogynistic, transphobic, fedora-wearing sock puppet account and instead made the attempt from her usual Steam account. Oh! And yes, I know Brianna Wu got some points for being on the losing end of some SJW drama, but I don't care. The endless social justice purity tests are a game of musical chairs, and eventually, if you play the game, you get left standing when the music stops. But to answer her own question here, Brianna Wu's half-assed attempt demonstrates that, yes, she's a pretty fucking terrible person who either can't or just won't wrap her head around the fact that people aren't mean to her because she's transgender. People are mean to her because she has the same talent for it as she does coding, game development, red herring histrionics, and honesty in general. And she can file away that mean comment as my personal gift to her, since she fucked up trolling for them on her own. Some self-trollers are good enough at it not to get caught red-handed, while some, such as this massive ham beast, are so spectacularly bad at it that they end up being prosecuted for it. I dream of legal consequences becoming the norm for people who troll themselves in order to play the victim and smear others, even entire communities, for what they gleefully and cynically did to themselves. In which case, I can look forward to Rebecca Watson and Anita Sarkeesian sharing the same pod. And by pod, I mean the kind of housing you find in a jail, and not the kind that cetaceans pal around in, because those poor bastards, and I mean the whales, have suffered enough. Pumping up the numbers for victim points makes no sense at all, except as the most cynical form of propaganda. Recently, figures for female genital mutilation got the statistical version of ballot box stuffing by including women who, all on their own, had genital piercings done. I mean, obviously no woman would mutilate herself with a tacky clit ring except for reasons blah blah blah, objectification blah blah blah, patriarchy blah blah. Point is, we know people lie. We know people make up "that happened" sort of tales to garner sympathy and smear enemies real and imagined. From the horror tales that justified the Crusades to rumors of sexual impropriety that got black men lynched in the South, to Tawana Brawley, to that young Republican lump who claimed Obama supporters carved a bee on her face, backwards, by the way, to any number of lies, hoaxes, and Potemkin sexual horror stories, the most recent of which are the Duke Lacrosse case and the Rolling Stone gang rape clickbait. We know people lie. People includes women. Despite the tantrums thrown by some women at the very suggestion that they, as a gender, are infallible as the Pope speaking ex cathedra. And some women don't hesitate to go to the nuclear option as a first resort, making accusations of child abuse, domestic violence, and in some cases even rape, because truth and basic decency isn't a consideration when it comes to getting their own way. Some women are, in fact, simply abusers who disguise themselves as damsels in distress.
So after he was out, that's when I called the police to have them come and take a picture of the door. And from there, they said that I needed...
Don't tell me what they said. What they said to you was hearsay. At that point, you filed a protective order.
The next day.
And you asked for sole custody, and I want to see the allegations that you made when you filed for the protective order.
I don't have the protective order with me.
Do you have the protective order? I want to see it. In whose name is the lease in this house or apartment?
It was under both of our names.
You have 2 other children. Is the father of those 2 children the same?
No.
I want you to answer my question very carefully. Did you ever file a protective order with regard to either of the fathers of those 2 children?
Yes.
Ah, you're a pro, Miss Gabb. You're a pro and you know how to work the system. I've been in the system. I hope the judge that ultimately hears your case, if it hasn't already been heard, is also a pro in the system.
Now, I find this sort of thing pretty frightening, and I try as best I can not to generalize to all women. But this woman, when her relationship with a man she had been living with for years and had a child with went south, she thought nothing of securing her child and her home by immediately making a false accusation. Now, Judith Scheinland spent years in the New York City family courts, so she's no doubt seen this before, and as Judge Judy said, this woman knew how to work the system. And enough women to matter can work the system to their own ends, up to and including a good old-fashioned false accusation.
Okay, and I've heard your testimony. And what you did was you used the criminal justice system and an application for a protective order as a leg up in a custody dispute with the father of your child. That's exactly what you did, and I have a feeling that you did that before, that you're not a stranger to that system. It's sort of self-help that very often parties use, sadly, mostly women, in order to get that leg up, to get exclusive possession of their residence and to get sole custody of their children. Let me tell you why. Well, I don't have to tell you why. I have to tell the hopefully millions of people who are watching this why. I take domestic violence really seriously. I think that anyone, men or women, who suffer from domestic violence need a voice, and it was all too long before they got that voice, and they now have it. Sadly, women like you give domestic violence, real domestic violence complaints, a bad name with people like me who have to judge them. Because let's recap what you did. You were at work. The father of your child, with whom you had lived as a couple for years, who had custody of him along with you, who was a father along with you, was home with your mother, who you brought in to take care of the children. Not his mother, your mother. Well, he got into a kerfuffle with your mother. Me, I would have kicked her out. It's not her home. It's his home. He's on the lease. It's his home. It's not your mother's home. She wasn't on the lease, was she?
No.
No. So I would have kicked her out and called the police and said, get that old lady out of my house. Not him. This man who you describe as having a terrible temper texted you at work and said, listen, I have to let this whole situation de-escalate for a while, so I'm going to go and stay at a friend's house until you get home. You spoke to your mother. Then you called him at night and said, we're done. No, he's on the lease. You can't say we're done and barricade yourself in the house. You can't do that. unless you've done it before. You see how you're smiling? Can't control yourself. So you barricaded yourself into the house. He didn't kick down the door. He pushed down the door because he wanted to get into his home, where he is entitled to be. And you're smart enough to know that if you called the police and said to the police, he pushed his way into the house, they're going to say, well, whose house is it? They're going to say, well, it's our house. They're going to say, he's entitled to be in his house. He didn't have a fight with you. He had a fight with his mother-in-law. Tell his mother-in-law to leave. We can't make him leave because he didn't touch you. Well, they done. And you know that. So very quietly and stealthily, you let him come upstairs and sleep in bed with you. And when he left in the morning, then you called the police. You called the police because, according to you, your mother said when he was orderly, taking his stuff and leaving, he says, but I'm going to come back for my son. I want my son. I love my son, just like you do. Law doesn't give you any special rights as a mother to your child, and you know that, because the law's equal. They say fathers are really fathers. They have rights to their children, the same as their mothers, and it doesn't matter who cooked them. So what you did was get a leg up, because you said, in order for me to do that, I've got to get an order throwing him out of the house, excluding him from the house, saying that I'm afraid of him, saying that he threatened to take my son, not his son, which you did, and some judge actually gave you that order. See, I wouldn't have done that. But we're all different. So you did have him falsely arrested, and he's suing you for $1,500 in attorney's fees. I would have given you a lot more. You have a counterclaim for your broken door. Fix it yourself. You had no reason to barricade somebody who had a perfect right to be in their apartment out of their home. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $1,500. A goodbye.
Parties are excused. They step out.
I don't know why you find this funny. I don't find it funny, actually. I find it very sad, because if what you're telling me is, since this all happened, he's been on a supervised visitation schedule, you, madam, are outrageous.
Now, the forces of social justice perpetual wankerdom and fashion victim feminist offense may decide to come after me for my previous intemperate remarks, such as observing that Brianna Wu is not so much gendered as mutated, and comparing Watson and Sarkeesian to harmless sea mammals, and thereby offending both Greenpeace and the whaling industry at the same time, and the suggestion that women aren't to be believed when they are, well, lying. But they won't. Once upon a time, they did try to bring to bear on me the full weight of their doxing and lying ass slanderous bullshit, thinking it would have the same effect it had on their more timorous and less constitutionally confrontational critics. Oh, they tried.
But I corrected them, sir.
A history of people being conciliatory towards them out of weakness or lack of conviction had given free-thought bullies, social justice clowns, and violence by proxy feminists the false impression that bullying, harassing, and smearing was a viable tactic, without taking into consideration that lulls at the expense of bullying, harassing, and smearing ass clowns is what gets people like me out of bed in the morning. Unfortunately for the shits and giggles department, social justice bullies and blowers of the threat narrative clown horn, the people who used to swell with pride at their ability to do harm to people in the real world, are unraveling. The once feared and respected glorified garden gnome P.C. Myers, he of the unvetted but amplified sexual accusation, is more and more relegated to being a little nothing blogger in Morris, Minnesota, feeding his ego with hermetically sealed power fantasies. Rebecca Watson, once the face of women in skepticism and social justice bloodsport gotcha specialist, has squandered every opportunity by revealing herself to be utterly overdrawn at the talent bank. Atheism Plus, once promoted as the next wave of the atheist movement, has dwindled down to a forum where everyone has been banned except for a handful of global moderators checking each other's privilege. Twitter's experiment in allowing two ideologues at Women Action and the Media police their users backfired spectacularly when they quickly took on the airs of Dr. Zayas, both head of the Ministry of Science and chief defender of the faith. Even the once BBC-approved Blockbot had to shut down after people finally realized the whole thing was simply the vanity project of some greasy little anemic sack of crap in the UK. The downside of your former dime store supervillains having lost their mojo is that one is forced, if you're me, to have to start upping the ante and doing terrible things to otherwise harmless pictures of Goatsy, not only because you can, or to see if those guys are still breathing, but because the resulting DEFCON 1 in the Hensley Pillow Fort, where comforters are burrowed under and entire family-sized fun packs of Oreos are laid to waste, is glorious in its contemplation. And so, it really takes something besides the background noise of Twitter bitching to get my attention. But this got my attention. Casey Johnson is a professor of political history at Brooklyn College and a liberal Democrat, despite the call everyone who disagrees with them a conservative tendency among the authoritarian left. He was one of the first and most effective critics of the Duke Lacrosse witch hunt and created the blog Durham in Wonderland that not only detailed the complete lack of evidence of any crime committed by the Duke players, but dug fearlessly into the misconduct of the prosecutor Mike Nifong and the craven complicity of the academic community that made a self-promoting rush to judgment. He gave a talk at Ohio State that focused on confirmed cases of false accusations of rape and sexual assault, such as the aforementioned Duke Lacrosse case and the University of Virginia rape hoax promoted by Rolling Stone. And his reason for doing so was to discuss the dilution of due process rights for the accused on college campuses, spurred by the increasing pandering of the Obama administration and their one-way interpretation of the equal protection mandated by Title IX.
They ended with a sense that changing procedures to make convictions more likely tended to make it much more likely that innocent people would be convicted, without doing without increasing the likelihood that actually guilty people would be found guilty, that in the end due process succeeded. And I suspect that that's where we're going with this issue, that if we were all to return to this room 7 or 8 years from now, there would be a reconsideration of these issues and there would be a tilt back in favor of due process. Until then, however, for a student accused of sexual assault on campus, at most campuses, the best chance of achieving justice largely lies in federal court. And a system where your best chance of winning is a multi-year lawsuit off-campus walls after an expulsion is probably not a system that is best suited to achieving justice. And with that, I'm happy to take questions from anyone who desires to do so.
Johnson makes his case not through polemics or impassioned emotional appeals, but through the sort of fairness, common sense, and respect for due process that was abandoned by the criminal justice system and the Duke faculty. He co-authored a book about the Duke case, Until Proven Innocent, Political Correctness and the Shameful Injustices of the Duke Lacrosse Rape Case. And it was a shameful injustice.
And all of a sudden, his secretary comes in and says, "Julian, Mike Nifong's on the phone." And my first reaction was, oh my God, it's one of those two. And he picks up the phone and he briefly glances up at me, and you could see, his face, the coloring in his face was changing. And my dad and I just sort of stared at each other. And you get that feeling in your stomach, that hit, and you don't even know what to do. You don't want to believe it, but you want to know. And he asked us to stand in the other room. There was a conference room, and we're standing in there, and we're just circling, and we're like, the room felt like it was spinning. And Julian comes in and says, "She picked you." And my dad just fell to the floor, and I just sat on the ground, and I said, "My life is over." And then we finally got up, and we were me and my dad were hugging each other, and Julian didn't even know what to say. And the first thing I thought about was, how am I going to tell my mom?
And what Seligman is talking about here is the police in Nifong's clever little trick of showing Crystal Mangum a photo lineup composed entirely of Duke lacrosse players in violation of all established protocols, so that no matter where her finger fell randomly, she picked a Duke lacrosse player. Although the 3 Duke players accused by Nifong are often treated in a no-harm, no-foul way, you really have to watch their testimony at Nifong's disbarment hearing to truly appreciate how devastating it was for them to be charred over the course of a very long witch burning. However, before I get into that, no. Let me share my experience with my sinuses turned into glue-filled sponges on the theory that you just can't get enough of that. It gave me lots of insight into the social justice mindset, in that it consisted of me laying on my couch and whining and generally being miserable. During that period, I took the time to completely familiarize myself with crime procedurals, such as forensic files on HLN and shows on ID Discovery. The problem with the former was, if I wasn't vigilant, a binge schedule of forensic files could run out, and the next thing I would see is the furious maw of Nancy Grace's mad cow nostrils. And since a lot of fatigue goes along with sinusitis, more than once I fell asleep, only to have my dreamscape intruded on by the screeching twang of Nancy Grace, who sounds like 2 jackals having anal sex in a coffee can. Now, many a crime procedural show focuses on wrongful convictions based on prosecutorial misconduct, where someone was just absolutely railroaded, or even before that, the police elicited a coerced confession from someone too trusting, too tired, or too distraught to be able to resist having a confession coerced. And the prosecutors were more than happy to roll with it. You see, very often it's easier to elicit a confession from an innocent person. Innocent people don't lawyer up. Innocent people trust the police. Innocent people just want to help. Innocent people take the nice officer's suggestion to write out a hypothetical of how they think the crime went down and then sign it. Innocent people don't realize the polygraph isn't a diagnostic tool for determining the truth. It's an interrogation tactic whereby the interrogator, if so inclined, gets to tell them they failed it just to stir things up a bit. And innocent people actually think the police and prosecutors give a shit that they're innocent. But a lot of the time they don't. Solving crimes and getting convictions is very often too much like work. Work that police and prosecutors are only willing to do if they want to catch the person who actually did the crime, rather than leaving them to walk among the general population. The highest form of this sophist art, and easy if you think it's all a game, is to convict someone of a crime when no crime actually occurred. However, if what they care about is wearing the uniform or the suit and tie and whatever lifestyle and authority they can get out of it, then sending some nobody to death row is a small price to pay for them. And even if their case is falling apart, they must reach the point, as I do when editing these things, to say, fuck it, just go with it. And although false convictions can happen anywhere, it seems that the People's Republic of Texas is overrepresented in this regard. In the annals of lazy punitive sociopathy, Texas pops up again and again. Remember that phrase, lazy punitive sociopathy. It'll be useful later. Now, there have been some high-profile cases of false conviction in Texas. In the case of Todd Willingham, the state of Texas may have executed an innocent man for arson on the basis of a bogus accelerant pour pattern, one supposedly in the shape of a pentagram, which went nicely with the satanic art in the house that was used to explain why Willingham torched the place, killing his daughters. The art was, in fact, Led Zeppelin and Iron Maiden posters. A well-respected fire investigator, Gerald Hurt, completely disagreed with the arson investigators that the Willingham house fire was arson at all. Worth noting is the difference between fire investigators and arson investigators, in that fire investigators investigate fires, while arson investigators, often poorly trained fire officials steeped in the sort of pseudoscientific bullshit that law enforcement loves, along with polygraphs, dowsing rods, and Satanism, look for arson. And when people look for things, unless they care about correcting their own confirmation bias, generally they find it. But the one that particularly stuck in my mind was the case of Debbie Lovelace and John Miller. Lovelace and Miller lived on a 5-acre farm in Texas with Lovelace's 2 daughters from a previous relationship. In 1989, Miller found 4-year-old April under a tree, nude, covered with scratches, and with an enormous wound in her right leg that severed her femoral artery. According to Miller, while April was still conscious, she said the family dogs did it. April died on the operating table. The prosecutor brought charges because the coroner thought the cuts and scratches were indicative of abuse, and the wound on April's leg was too clean-edged to be from an animal attack and was obviously made with a knife. Lovelace and Miller were tried and convicted of April's murder, in no small part because the prosecution demonstrated, rightly so, that the edges of April's leg wound was made with a knife, and they had the pictures to prove it. Their theory was that April's injuries were the result of abuse and a cult bloodletting ceremony. Years after the conviction, it turns out that the wound edges were the result of a knife wielded by surgeons in the operating room trying to save April's life. What the prosecution didn't share with the jury was the photos of April's wound before surgeons cleaned up the edges. The prosecutors had them, they just pretended that they didn't exist. In fact, the possibility of a dog attack was never presented to the jury, in part because the defense, not having seen the photos, also believed April's death was murder. This is referred to as prosecutorial error. I call it being lazy, punitive sociopaths. You see, for the prosecutorial type, who is more interested in getting convictions than getting at the truth, and for whom the truth is often something that needs to be suppressed, due process is just a pain in the ass. In these cases, due process involving evidence, objectivity, and disclosure isn't something a prosecutor participates in. It's something they actively avoid. What's worse, after the fact, the state often fights exonerations tooth and nail, either due to the puffed-up egos of prosecutors or the puffed-up ego of the state, who, and this was the case with the West Memphis Three, actually proposed a theory that exoneration is a bad thing, as it would reflect poorly on the criminal justice system. So what does this have to do with anything? It's just that social justice warriors, particularly when it comes to claims of sexual assault, are given to making spurious accusations for their own ends, and are as immune to correction and retraction as the most corrupt of prosecutors. They are bad prosecutors. They are state of Texas prosecutors. They care about getting convictions, not arriving at the truth. This is particularly true of the ideological feminists that propose there's such a thing as rape culture and fight tooth and nail against both due process and the exoneration of anyone accused of rape, regardless how spurious the accusation turns out to be. Want to see this in action? Here's a sample of lazy, punitive sociopathy organized against Casey Johnson's appeal for fairness and due process. Remember, Johnson was there to discuss 2 exemplar false accusations, that of the Duke Lacrosse case and the University of Virginia gang rape hoax, and how, rather than not believing the victim, the university tribunal system has discarded due process to the degree that it's almost impossible to determine whether or not a crime actually occurred. Which was just fine with a bunch of clowns in the front row representing an organization, Fuck Rape Culture, apparently founded last Thursday in a throw-pillow-lined girl safe space and composed entirely of public access Muppets wearing hand-sharpied white t-shirts proclaiming in totally missing the point non-sequitur fashion, rape is real. Now, the definition of rape culture, and I'm getting this from Wikipedia, so you know it's gone over by fashion victim feminists and social justice types on a daily basis, claims rape culture is a construct in which rape is characterized as pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender and sexuality. Behaviors commonly associated with rape culture include victim blaming, sexual objectification, trivializing rape, denial of widespread rape, or refusing to acknowledge the harm of some forms of sexual violence. In claiming rape is somehow normalized suggests that raping women is an accepted everyday occurrence, perhaps even encouraged, which is completely fucking nuts. However, as we know, the way this semantic game is played is to claim normalization involves trivializing and discounting claims of rape. In order to make this a self-fulfilling claim, advocates for the existence of rape culture have so expanded the definition of rape that it would include things that no sane person, or the supposed victim, would consider rape. So if a rape culture advocate claims that a woman who had a couple of glasses of wine, because women are not supposed to monitor or experience consequences from their own alcohol consumption, and then not only enthusiastically consents to sexual intercourse, but even initiates it, she's still a rape victim. In response to which, normal, sane, non-sexist people who think of women as fully volitional adult human beings tend to say, "You've got to be kidding." At which point the advocate for the existence of rape culture tucks that away in their scrapbook of trivializing rape and not believing the victim. The existence of rape culture is an article of faith. Advocates don't question if such a thing actually exists. They just comb through anecdotal examples to find evidence for it. Which is why their evidence for rape culture tends to be weak, and they distract from having piss-poor examples by having lots of them. For instance, Everyday Feminism, their BuzzFeed list of 25 everyday examples of rape culture, includes these sterling examples. Pop music that tells women you know you want it because of these blurred lines of consent. And it's not just pop music that's all rapey. The old crooner's standby, "Baby, It's Cold Outside," also provides evidence of the big societal thumbs up given to rape. And then there's this. Mothers who blame girls for posting sexy selfies and leading their sons into sin instead of talking with their sons about the responsibility for their own sexual expression. I'd like to say something snide, but honestly I have no fucking clue what that even means. It's probably a typo, and what they meant was mothers should teach their sons to take responsibility for the sexual expression of random girls taking nudies. This one is my favorite. Rape culture is exemplified by photo memes like this. Now, some clever Photoshopper did a victim narrative translation of this woman holding a sign detailing all the ways she's been raped, which actually reads more like unfortunate cheating drunk sex in a stairway, but the guy is totally at fault, for not taking responsibility for the sexual expression of drunk chicks. But here's a fun fact. The woman in the picture who claims she has been raped 6 ways to Sunday is Jackie Coakley at the 2011 Slut Walk. Jackie, from the sort of stuff she posts online, seems obsessed with all things rapey. Jackie. Does that name ring a bell? Yeah, that's the Jackie that Rolling Stone used as the one and only source for the University of Virginia rape hoax. Not believing Jackie about all the times and many ways she's been raped? Well, that's rape culture. And shame on you, because, number 11, calling college students who have the courage to report their rapes liars. It's odd. Names like fuck rape culture and slut walk, it's almost as if these women want to be both members of the Junior Anti-Sex League, because, all heterosexual sex is rape when you get right down to it, but also want to sexualize their prudery and revulsion over it. I suspect doing so gives them a tingle, basically the angry and sexually confused girl version of a weird boner. This is also rape culture. A judge who sentenced only 30 days in jail to a 50-year-old man who raped a 14-year-old girl who later committed suicide and defended that the girl was older than her chronological age. Now, from the article linked, the man, the girl's teacher, was found guilty of sexual relations without consent, but it's unclear whether that was forcible rape or statutory rape, in that an underage girl could not give consent. But either way, it's a crime deserving of more than a 30-day jail sentence. However, it makes me wonder, if this man getting a light sentence for committing rape against a 14-year-old girl is an example of rape culture against women, then is the slew, and I mean there are tons of these cases, of a female teacher having sex with an underage male student and getting a slap on the wrist, perhaps probation if she got Judge Dredd that day, then is that an example of female rape culture against men? No, of course not, supporters of feminist rape culture would claim. And if you think so, you just don't understand how cherry picking works.
As a member of Fuck Rape Culture, we appreciate you coming to validate our fight against rape apologists such as yourself, who clearly do not respect women or any survivor of sexual assault. Sexual assault is one of the most underreported crimes because the reporting process is usually invasive, re-traumatizing, and inherently relies on second-guessing the victim. As a survivor of sexual assault, I did not report because I was fearful of not being believed. I'm here to tell you your victim-blaming rhetoric is indeed an example of this rape culture you refuse to acknowledge exists.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, so there's a whole lot of nonsense there. Mostly it's nonsensical because these are prepared remarks created in a safe space vacuum that doesn't actually relate to anything that Casey Johnson actually said at that time or, for that matter, ever. And nothing in that statement represents a coherent flow of thought. It's just the random plastering of bumper sticker phrases intended not to illuminate, but to demonstrate the speaker can go through the list of buzzwords like a true believer, unswayed by any of the heathen talk that might have corrupted someone less pure in their faith. And that's no surprise. If there's anything that SJW types excel at, it's flipping their heads back on a hinge and spewing out little sour bricks of emotive nonsense like a demented Pez dispenser. Of course, her intent is not to make a point or even insult Johnson, although she does that quite effortlessly. Rather, she's displaying the awesome power of disapproval. What she is expressing is not that Johnson is right or wrong, as that is largely irrelevant, but that he has upset her by saying things disagreeable to her beliefs. The one phrase that really sticks out, because it's so inherently unfair, is the accusation that Casey Johnson doesn't respect women. You know, the way this smug little schoolgirl respects Casey Johnson, and so, by extrapolation, all men. In this case, not respecting women is not because Johnson said anything sexist, but because he didn't say anything sexist. That is, he didn't mouth the benign sexism of the pandering male whereby all women are to be believed at all times, rather than considering women to be human beings who can be in error or mendacious as anyone else. It's hard to trace the warped logic whereby admitting that some accusations of rape are without merit into general disrespect for all women, but I think it has to do with the tendency of some women, and by some I mean idiots, to universalize themselves or any particular woman to all women and vice versa. Equally puzzling is the strange claim whereby if one woman is empowered, then all are. So you'll get some women, and I'm talking about idiots here, saying something like, watching Sonia Thomas choke down a shitload of Nathan's hot dogs was so empowering to me as a woman. Yeah? How the fuck does that work exactly? It's as if they can flip back and forth between individualism and collectivism with no effort. And the flip side of this just works against men. Convenient and selective universalization of men is how you can effortlessly claim all men are rapists because some small percentage are, and how all men have power because some men do, and how all men are record and airline tycoons because of Richard Branson. The point is, if you disrespect a woman by, for example, not believing her, even when she's obviously lying, then you have denigrated all women, and therefore any particular woman, and women, and your mom.
Wow.
Oh, and wonder what this finger snapping is all about? Well, apparently these sort of women find applause, the smacking of one hand against the other, far too violent and triggering. Some do the finger snapping, Others, like a conference in the UK, prefers the use of non-triggering feminist jazz fingers. The fuck?
You got a question?
Using statistics from the FBI and Department of Justice, it is estimated that odds of straight man in the United States being falsely accused of rape are 2.7 million to 1. To put this into perspective for everyone else, you are approximately 5 times as likely to win $10,000 in the Powerball lottery than to be falsely accused of rape. You are 750 times more likely to die from alcohol poisoning than be falsely accused of rape. You are 11 times more likely to be killed by an asteroid or a comet than to be falsely accused of rape. You are 631 more times likely to become an NFL player than to be falsely accused of rape. And as a man, you are 82,000 times more likely to be raped than to be falsely accused of rape.
And that came from what FBI document?
The FBI and Department of Justice.
And the statements that you've just given are a verbatim quote from the FBI and the Department of Justice?
The first one about the United States being being a straight man in the United States being falsely accused of rape are 2.7 million.
And that's
to
it.
1.
Oh boy, now that's some research, huh? I don't know if this woman got this research straight off BuzzFeed, or BuzzFeed, following its business model, just ripped off someone else. Still, the kind of Facebook wall facts that would wow them in the Tumblr ball pit doesn't seem to be the sort of stuff you'd want to try to slide by a professor with the credentials of Casey Johnson. In response to the oft-cited but never confirmed statistic that 1 in 5 women will be raped on college campuses, even when you set aside that this is based on one of those expansive everything is rape definitions, Johnson points out this would mean that there is an incidence of rape on American campuses that rivals the war-torn Congo, where rape is used as a weapon of military terror. That's right, American college campuses, more rapey than the Civil War in the Congo. And considering that false accusations of rape occur because, Johnson just pointed out 2 glaring examples in his talk, what's the purpose of making a claim that instances of false accusation are so rare that, in fact, they don't ever happen at all? Seriously, isn't that the purpose of making a completely bogus claim that false accusations of rape are so rare that they are less likely than things that have never happened, such as a human killed by an asteroid? Still, to see the prosecutorial mindset in all its glory, check this out.
According to a report conducted by the National Center for the Prosecution of Violence Against Women, 2 to 8% of rape reports are false. But the number of false rape accusations is even smaller, given that many unfounded reports are usually confused with being false reports. However, as you should know, an unfounded report does not equate to an unfounded accusation. Reports that are labeled as unfounded can be so for a variety of reasons, including a truthful victim that decides to recant out of fear or anxiety that stems from the judicial process. And unfortunately, any survivor disclosing a founded accusation, whether its correlating report is founded, unfounded, or unreported, is nearly always exposed to victim blaming and shaming, often thanks to the misleading discourses similar to the one you continue to spew.
There you quite literally have a rape culture conspiracy theorist acting as a mouthpiece for a prosecutors' advocacy group formed by the District Attorneys Association. And all the ad hoc rationalizations are in place. The accused is guilty. Lack of evidence doesn't make the accused not guilty. Recantations by the accuser does not make the accused not guilty. The accusation is the evidence. If you drown in the pond, then you're not a witch. If you float, then you're a witch, and you have to be burned. But the point is, no witches get off unpunished. And there's a very, very thin line for true believers between believing in someone's guilt because you can explain away evidence and testimony, and simply ignoring evidence and testimony, and suppressing it outright for the supposed greater good. And for that greater good, sacrificing some completely innocent men to the goddess of women's infallibility is a small price to pay. You know, a male in college these days, one that isn't asocial and cloistered, should be completely distrustful. Not necessarily of the government with its unique and one-sided interpretation of Title IX, or even of the university administrators. Governments and bureaucracies, even ones that pay lip service to being post-enlightenment, have always been great whores of expediency. Now, what I would completely distrust is my fellow college-age women, some of whom would think nothing, absolutely nothing, of destroying a man's life and even sending him to prison on a whim, simply out of revenge, or her inability to take ownership of her own sexual behavior, or out of a general ideological consideration that limitless and unchecked power to screw a guy over is good for women. And it's hard to tell who these women are when they're not wearing homemade social justice t-shirts. They may look perfectly normal, yet have internalized a lifetime of entitlement to engage in lazy, punitive sociopathy that they got from women posturing as role models, their schools and universities, and even pop culture sources of sitcoms and commercials. Want to fight the bogus statistics and gender smearing with some reasoned argument? Well, you can't. Not anymore. A student tried to do that in one class, disputing the 1 in 5 figure, and the hug box tossed him out of the class, in the interest of academic safety over freedom, of course.
I'm really comforted by the administrative response,
said Kate Hiltz, a junior and unknown to her, a member of the reconstituted Hitler Youth.
It's really nice to know that my school supports survivors and listens when they say they don't feel safe. Rape culture is indisputable, and True's words and actions are deeply upsetting. They've re-traumatized and triggered survivors, and that seems antithetical to rape culture. Penis.
I really don't want to be known as the guy who does rape and sexual assault videos, but the effect of false accusations has been devastating. The Duke case, the University of Virginia cases destroyed lives, but ultimately no one was railroaded in the courts. But then there's the long, long list of men exonerated by the Innocent Project who have spent decades in prison based on error, prosecutorial misconduct, and really the believe the victim mentality. Usually when the subject of false accusation is even discussed, the usual trope is to note how difficult they make it for legitimate victims of rape and sexual assault, which may be true, but I find it telling and suspect that far from living in a rape culture, the subject of false accusations against men becomes how this affects women. The men who are falsely accused usually don't get so much as an afterthought. That is, the plight of men falsely accused of rape is important only insofar as how this makes it hard on women. It's pretty fucked up, really. You see, the thing is, no one trivializes rape. Rape is a terrible crime. Rapists are bad people. And so falsely accusing someone of committing rape, of being a rapist, is only as trivial as the act of rape itself, which is to say, not at all trivial. If the social justice authoritarian types wanted to get across the point that they came with prepared boilerplate remarks that had nothing to do with what Casey Johnson was talking about, and that during his talk they stood strong by not paying attention, not listening, texting how they were fighting the good fight, and being completely immune to recent discourse, then they succeeded. They also succeeded in displaying a huge double standard and self-obsession in that they want the minutest attention paid to their feelings and their ideology, but can't so much as pretend to give a shit about what happens to a man falsely accused of rape. In fact, they deny that false accusations ever happen, which, if you think about it, is less of a reflection on how they feel about rape and more revealing of what they think about men, which is not at all. It's odd how they consistently imply that respect is something that is a woman's birthright for being a woman, but could not extend the respect necessary to Casey Johnson to hear what he had to say. Believe the victim becomes just another way to say, shut the fuck up. And they can't extend that respect they demand to men, even so much as to grant them basic human rights. After all, Johnson consistently gave a respectful, reasoned response to their reading off their smartphone shit they cribbed off the internet the night before, and this is the thanks he got.
One of the reasons I think why we don't see lots of judges siding with campuses to date in the recent lawsuits is that they're sensing that these policies don't respect due process. Okay. All right. And then we'll get you. Yes.
He can't tell them anything, as they have the undergraduate women's way of knowing, where all knowledge flows like blood clots and sourdough from the sacred vagina and codified in the doctrines of women's studies, identity politics, and mail-order degrees in sociology. Their sophistry is sealed and watertight against 90 atmospheres of common sense. You know, what people who carry out witch hunts, pogroms, and purges convinced they're doing God's work look like? Like this. But, you know, fuck men. Provided we coddle women, let them call drunk sex rape, call regretted sex rape, use rape as a cover for their mistakes and embarrassment, use false accusations of a tool of vengeance and compliance, with absolutely no way for a man to challenge it. Because women, particularly ignorant college-age women with green hair and a morbidly obese sense of entitlement, have determined that their word should be enough to convict, and for the most part, pandering, gutless universities agree with them. You know what sexism is? It's continuing the culture where we make it impossible for women to fuck up and be wrong. And we do that by not applying the same standards as we do to adult human beings. We coddle them, we're overtly concerned about offending or upsetting people, even when they are rambling off pure horseshit. Sexism is the culture where women are not held responsible for their choices and can make false accusations, and then, when they fall apart, if they fall apart, walk away without consequences. And I would submit that anyone who wants to eviscerate due process to the point where men can be convicted in courts, kangaroo or otherwise, based on an accusation alone, can't posture as being anti-racist too. Because if you want to bring back lynching, guess which men are most likely going to get lynched? Asking men to gladly waive due process, to be guilty because we are accused out of some vague and erroneous sense that this is somehow good for women, the dumbest, most hysterical and infantile of women, seems to be asking a bit much. Unfortunately, there are many, many men who will go along with this program, sell out other men to appease the most irrational and vindictive of women, until there comes a day when there's no one to speak for them, when they are engulfed by the same moral panic they promoted. One thing that these kinds of women, and we're still talking about idiots here, love to say in response to anything derogatory about women is to ask if the person making the comment has a mother or a sister. One has to ask, with their all men are guilty if accused attitude, whether they have fathers and brothers, or whether they have so compartmentalized their man-hate that it never occurs to them. I wish we had a venue where they can do this sort of test to determine if someone is a rapist or is not a rapist. Oh, wait, we do. It's called a criminal trial. Not the corrupt courts where due process has been whittled away, but courts where due process, respect for fairness and decency and evidence, where people really and truly are innocent until proven guilty, and where the state has to actually meet its burden of proof. That's what we should be aspiring to. But we can't have that. We can't have reason. We can't have objectivity. We can't even discuss those things social justice assholes deem off limits to anything but obsequious, bobble-headed agreement. The truth is whatever you can make people believe according to them, and their truth with a capital dogmatic T is an article of faith, revealed wisdom, sacred and infallible. And they're gathering up the stakes and dry tinder for anyone who might question it. And that we are seeing this dark age descend in universities and institutes of higher learning, in the courts, shows how much we have retreated from the Enlightenment. And this is what the long, dark night of the social justice, rape culture soul looks like.
Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?